This plaque at Fotheringhay Castle in Northamptonshire marks the place at which in 1587 Elizabeth I approved the execution of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. There's little that remains of the castle today, but what was the former Queen of Scotland doing down here in England, and why did Elizabeth feel the need to have her own cousin executed? Well, we're going to answer both questions in today's video. To answer those questions, we're going to have to go back to 1534, when Elizabeth's father was still on the throne. And Elizabeth's father was, of course, Henry VIII. In 1534, Henry famously split from the Catholic Church to set up the Protestant Church of England with himself in charge, in order to give himself more power and also to marry his second wife, Anne Boleyn, with whom he had Elizabeth I. By the time Elizabeth herself became queen in 1558, the country was somewhat divided over religion, though she did manage to negotiate this fairly well by having her policy of a middle way, allowing both Protestantism and Catholicism to an extent, providing that no one caused a problem. However, north of the border in Protestant Scotland, her Catholic cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, was having a much more difficult experience. After marrying for the second time in Scotland in 1567, shortly after the suspicious death of her first husband, in which she was a prime suspect, Mary was branded a murderer and an adulteress by several Scottish Protestant lords. She was imprisoned and forced to abdicate her throne in favour of her infant son James, who became James VI of Scotland. After almost a year imprisoned in Scotland, Mary managed to escape and decided to flee towards northern England in order to seek help from her cousin Elizabeth. Though upon her arrival in northern England, Elizabeth was extremely cautious, as Mary had once claimed the English throne, being descended from Henry VII, much the same as Elizabeth. As a result of this caution, Elizabeth kept Mary imprisoned in Carlisle Castle initially in northern England, and for the entirety of Mary's 19-year stay in England, she was kept in various prisons throughout England, such as Sheffield, Bolton and Buxton, and Elizabeth never actually met with her face to face. While in prison, various English Catholics claimed that Mary was actually the true heir to the throne and a better fit than Elizabeth, as Elizabeth had been born after Henry VIII's first divorce, and she was therefore illegitimate, and various plots emerged to try and either assassinate Elizabeth or simply replace her with Mary. Elizabeth had grown up with Henry VIII as a father, and she'd watched him execute two of his wives, including her mother Anne Boleyn. So Elizabeth was no stranger to these situations and knew that Mary needed to be dealt with, but she was hesitant to just execute her because of her position as a former queen. She didn't want to alienate Scotland and cause further tension down the line with them. However, after the 1586 Babington plot, in which Mary was thought to have allied with an English lord, Anthony Babington, in order to assassinate Elizabeth, clear evidence was seized in Mary's letters that she'd been involved in that particular assassination attempt of Elizabeth. Whether the evidence in those letters was genuine or not remains unclear to this day, as it could have also been altered to suit Elizabeth's agenda. Either way, Elizabeth needed Mary dealt with, as she'd become a figurehead for Catholic plots to assassinate or remove Elizabeth from the throne. Mary was then brought here to Fotheringhay in September 1586 to face a trial. She was brought here due to its marshy conditions and distance from Scotland, making an escape attempt extremely unlikely. She was trialled here in what can hardly be described as objective circumstances, with Mary claiming that she wasn't able to review the evidence for herself or that a lot of it was problematic. Unsurprisingly, Mary was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. Elizabeth was still reluctant, though, to actually deliver an execution, as she was nervous of straining relations with Scotland going forward. So to get around this, she signed the death warrant and handed it to her counsellors, but was deliberately vague about whether to actually go through with this or not. Her advisors then followed through on this, and Mary was executed here in February of 1587. Elizabeth later put some of her counsellors in prison for disobeying her in an attempt to distance herself from the execution of Mary in order to save the relationship with Scotland in the future. This may seem harsh, but in an alternate universe, it could have been Elizabeth that was killed in favour of Mary taking the throne. Mary has often been called the unluckiest queen in history, so what do you think? Comment below, and thanks for watching.